Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
We are stepping deep into an archive that documents one of the most chilling, precise, and just total acts of cosmic retribution ever compiled.
Absolutely.
We are talking about the complete annihilation of the city of Sarnath, a civilization that, for a full millennium, defined human arrogance, wealth, and splendor, only to vanish entirely in a single terrifying night.
That's right. And our mission today is it's a full archival reconstruction. We're pulling together 6 extremely different sources. We have sworn depositions, emotional panicked accounts from fleeing princes.
Right.
We have detailed official city guides written at the absolute peak of Sarnathian power. We have translations of their ancient founding stela, scholarly monographs.
And that final surveyor's report.
And that final cold surveyor's report, which just details the absolute zero-trace resolution of the event. It's damning.
So we're not just reading through these documents, we are building a minute-by-minute narrative, and it's one that spans 1,000 years. We have to reconstruct the entire arc, from the foundational act of violence and hubris, through the 1,000 years of what seems like deliberate forgetting, right up to the terrifying ritualistic resolution that left. Nothing but marshy reeds behind.
And that's the central paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
The core question that runs through every single one of these documents is the sheer totality and the speed of the erasure.
Yeah.
How does a city that proudly claimed, 50 million men?
50 million.
Boasting marble walls that stretch 300 cubits into the sky.
Just incredible.
Holding a self-proclaimed status as the wonder of the world, how does that become nothing but a desolate, stagnant shore in just a few hours? It wasn't defeated.
No.
It was unmade.
To understand the cataclysmic fall of Sarnath, we have to start where they began their empire, with the people and the place they chose to destroy. We have to introduce the pre-Sarnathian world, and specifically the gray city of Ib.
Exactly. 1,000 years before Sarnath was even a thought, before the dark shepherd folk of Mnar, and these are the ancestors of the human settlements like Thra and Ilarnik, arrived, there existed this unique, non-human civilization.
And we only know about it because of, what? The Cadatharan cylinders.
Primarily from the translation of the Cadatharan cylinders, and, the irony is thick here, the Sarnathian founding stela itself, which documented the destruction of Ib as a boast.
As a point of pride.
A point of pride. And what those texts describe is, it's profoundly unsettling. It suggests an entity far, far older than humanity's fleeting civilizations.
Ib was known as the Gray City, and it stood by a vast, still lake. And the sources really stress this stillness.
They do.
The cylinder translations point out very clearly that this body of water has no stream feeding it and no stream flows from it.
Right. It's an isolated, stagnant reservoir of deep time. The text notes it's as old as the city itself.
That sets the stage perfectly. We are looking at human ambition colliding head-on with a deep, primeval existence that just operates outside the flow of human history.
And the inhabitants of Ib, as described in those cylinders, they possess characteristics that become the literal, visible hallmarks of the final doom. This is not a coincidence.
Let's get into their appearance, because these details aren't just for flavor. They are the key to recognizing the nature of the retribution later on. Their overall aspect was consistently noted as
not pleasing to behold.
Right. And their color, their hue, was described as the very green of the lake water itself and the mists which rose from it.
And we get this very clinical physical description, almost designed to evoke revulsion in the human reader. They had consistently bulging eyes. Their lips were described as pouting and flabby, and the text stressed they were voiceless. A detail that becomes so crucial later, this idea that Sarnath's descendants could spend 1,000 years mocking them without any fear of reply.
The founding stela, the one written by the victors, adds that final derogatory detail. It calls them soft and weak as jelly.
So you can see the picture they're painting. When the shepherd folk arrived, these were not fearsome warriors.
No.
They were repulsive but easily conquered targets, defined by their fragility and their connection to that stagnant green water.
But their origin myth that provides the first truly alien insight, it suggests the shepherd folk were invading a place that wasn't even terrestrial in origin.
That's in the Cadatharan cylinders. This strange, unique claim that these beings, their entire gray city, and the vast, still lake itself, they all descended from the moon in a great mist.
From the moon.
From the moon. Now, whether you read that as mythology or some kind of ancient extraterrestrial settlement, the text leaves that open.
Yeah.
But the consistency of the narrative, city, lake, and people all arriving together, It points toward an invasive, deep-time provenance.
So they were green like the water. They arrived in a mist from the moon, and they'd been there for ages. And what defined their existence all that time, it was their worship.
Their entire theological focus was on a being called Bokrug, the great water lizard. They worshipped a sea-green stone idol, carved precisely in his likeness.
And there's that lunar connection again.
It's always there. Their rituals, according to the records, involve fire and horrible dances, and these acts were specifically performed when the moon was gibbous.
That's a very specific detail.
It is. This pattern, green, water, moon, fire, it's laid out meticulously in the archive, long before Sarnath even existed. It's the formula for the doom.
And Ib wasn't just a collection of fragile beings and huts. It was anchored by profound antiquity. The founding stela mentions specific gray sculptured monoliths found within the city.
Structures that reeked of an antiquity that should have long passed from the world.
The whole setting just screams of a deep, forgotten, and maybe suppressed history, just waiting for one arrogant civilization to come along and disturb it.
It creates the perfect foundation for the violent, short-sighted hubris that defines the human narrative that follows. The shepherd folk found the perfect spot, one already claimed by time itself.
Which brings us, inevitably, into part 2. 1,000 years of triumphant derision. So the shepherd folk arrive at the still lake, and the stela tells us their motivation was, well, it was purely material.
Right.
They found precious metals in the earth near the shore. That immediate promise of wealth, the potential for an empire built on mining and commerce, that was the true reason for laying the foundation of Sarnath.
They established their new settlement, but the presence of Ib, this gray city, it stood as a moral and an aesthetic offense to their burgeoning human pride.
You couldn't stand it.
So the shepherd folk decided that it was, and this is a direct quote, not meet that such beings should walk the world of men. This wasn't just military expansion, it was a deliberate ideological cleansing. It was predicated on human supremacy.
And the stela recounts the event in these stark, triumphant terms. Sarnath's young warriors marched against Ib and slew all the inhabitants thereof. It even emphasizes that the victims were soft and offered no true battle.
It was an execution. It wasn't a conflict.
Not at all.
And the detail here, it just speaks volumes about the utter contempt the conquerors felt. The stela specifies they used long spears to push the queer bodies, that evocative term is used multiple times,
Right.
into the lake, because they did not wish to touch them with their hands.
It's not just revulsion. That feels like an ingrained superstitious fear, doesn't it? Maybe a fear of contamination by their alien nature. They were terrified even in victory.
I think so. And the physical evidence of Ib was also systematically eliminated. Those hated gray monoliths that represented an inconveniently deep history.
Into the lake.
They were toiled to be cast into the lake too, joining the bodies. And the land, the stela proudly declares, was purified for human habitation.
Everything was submerged. The structures, the bodies, the history, the monoliths, everything except one critical item.
They chose to keep the sea-green stone idol of Bokrug.
They took it as a trophy, a symbol of their conquest over the old, base things of the earth. They bring it back and set it up in their new, freshly consecrated temple in Sarnath. And here, I mean instantaneously, the first and most terrifying consequence. The first omen strikes. The debt is incurred immediately.
This is the incident of Taranish. It happens the very night the idol was set up. We know from the subsequent chronicle that sentries saw weird lights over the lake. By morning, the Bokrug idol was gone. It had vanished, despite being under constant guard. And the high priest, Taranish, was found dead before the chrysolite altar. That altar, made of this highly valued green-gold material, was meant to display the glory of their new gods.
What makes this so chilling, so profoundly disturbing, is the state of his body. It was unmarked. He wasn't killed by a physical blow or a weapon.
No. But his face was contorted by a fear unspeakable. And with a shaky, possibly final hand, he scrawled one single word upon that altar. Doom. And the City Chronicle, desperate to maintain the narrative of glorious founding and absolute conquest, it just quickly dismisses this as a strange, isolated incident.
Right.
Possibly the result of Taranish's own madness.
Right, blame the victim.
But it's the moment the clock starts ticking. The reckoning had begun immediately, signaled by the missing idol and that single, terrifying, indelible word.
And so, the citizens of Sarnath spent the next 1,000 years building an entire civilization designed, physically and spiritually, to forget that single word of warning. Which brings us to Sarnath at its apex, detailed beautifully or perhaps grotesquely in the official city guide, Sarnath the Magnificent. This is where we need to spend some serious time just exploring the scale of their psychological and architectural hubris.
Oh, that city guide is a masterpiece of self-glorification. It positions Sarnath as the unchallenged apex of civilization, a monument to the absolute triumph of man over the primitive and the ancient. The scale of their wealth and the sheer physical effort poured into their defensive and religious structures. It just demonstrates their absolute conviction in their own internal status.
Let's contextualize the sheer size of the boast for a moment. The city walls, made from highly polished, desert-quarried marble, rose 300 cubits high.
So to ground that for you, a cubit is roughly 1.5 feet. We're talking about walls that were approximately 450 feet tall.
Taller than many modern skyscrapers. It's unbelievable.
And this wasn't just a height boast, it was a statement of structural supremacy. The walls were 75 cubits broad. That's over 110 feet wide.
Wow.
The text boasts that two fully armed chariots could pass each other along the top without any fear of collision. It wasn't just a defensive structure, it was a ribbon of pure marble arrogance encircling the city.
And inside those walls, every detail just screamed extravagance and permanence. The streets weren't dirt or cobbled stone, they were paved entirely with onyx.
I mean, think about the monumental logistical effort just to quarry, transport, and lay such heavy, costly stone throughout an entire city of 50 million people.
It's staggering. The homes, too, they rejected practical design in favor of aesthetic vanity, featuring these shining domes, a unique architectural style meant to catch the sun and just project their wealth outward.
Their religious architecture was the ultimate physical rejection of the primitive god Bokrug. They built 17 massive tower-like temples, fashioned of bright, multicolored stone, each dedicated to their new human-centric deities, Zokalar, Tamash, and Loblan.
And the greatest of those stood a full 1,000 cubits high.
Over 1,500 feet, literally brushing the heavens. This proximity to the sky, to their new gods, it symbolized their final, definitive distance from the voiceless, water-bound deity they had displaced.
The centers of secular power, they matched this splendor. The king's palace, the guide notes, was built around a throne wrought from a single piece of ivory.
A single piece. And the text even mentions the source of that vast tusk was unknown, suggesting an almost mythical origin, just to emphasize the king's unparalleled wealth.
This extravagance wasn't just for show either. It fueled their public life. They had these magnificent amphitheaters designed for lion fights and, incredibly, arenas that could be flooded for stirring sea fights.
Think about the engineering required for that. To conduct naval battles for entertainment within a landlocked city near a still lake. This level of complexity just reinforces the idea that Sarnath saw no problem as insurmountable, no effort too great to prove their dominion over nature itself.
And the culmination of this collective arrogance, the ritualistic embodiment of their 1,000-year-long amnesia, was their most cherished annual tradition, the Feast of the Destroying of Ib.
This was so much more than a simple holiday. It was the ultimate act of triumphant, institutionalized derision. Every year, at a specific point in the calendar, they didn't just celebrate their conquest.
No, they actively mocked the memory of the Iba beings and their crude god, Bokrug. They formalized the insults, calling the annihilated non-humans jellyfish and moonspawn.
And the sources show this deliberate, profound ideological shift over the millennium. In the early centuries, the text confirms that some priests, they maintained a degree of caution.
They remembered Taranish.
Exactly. They were perhaps still haunted by his dying word, doom, and the vanished idol. But 1,000 years of riches and delight, of unchallenged prosperity and unquestioned dominance, it had eroded any sense of caution.
Oh, gone.
The official guide confirms that by the time of the final feast, even the current supposedly wise priests had abandoned fear entirely. They were documented to laugh and join the orgies of the feasters, performing the ancient rite, the remembrance of the destruction, only in detestation of Bokrug.
That active public detestation is the key to their downfall. They weren't just ignoring Bokrug, they were spitting on his memory while standing on the land they had stolen. They had become so secure in their 300-cubit marble walls and 1,000-cubit temples that they genuinely believed Sarnath was eternal. They had collectively and successfully buried the dead, convinced that the word doom was just the ravings of a dead priest.
They had established the perfect target, physically magnificent, spiritually corrupt, and precisely on the chronological anniversary of their crime, 1,000 years to the day.
which catapults us into part 3, the exact moment the debt was called in, the night of the 1000th year feast. For this, we transition from city guides to raw, panicked eyewitness testimony. We're relying on the deposition of Alar, the Prince of Rokol, and the triage debriefing of Captain Tams of Ilornik.
And these accounts, they capture the transition from drunken euphoria to unendurable terror. Alar's account sets the gathering dread perfectly.
It was outside the walls, right?
Yes. His retinue was camped outside the monumental walls on the vast plain which was a sea of tents, hosting delegations from the allied cities. Thra, Cadatharin, and Ilornik. He confirms the city was drunken with its own glory, the noise was deafening, and the Sarnathians themselves were impossibly arrogant, actively mocking the very concept of any lasting threat or doom.
But well into the night, the atmosphere shifted, radically, and Alar provides the first chilling detail that connects directly back to the ancient Ib rituals. The moon.
The moon was gibbous,
Right.
a precise echo of the configuration Ib's inhabitants required for their horrible dances and fire worship. And that moon cast a sick, greenish-yellow light.
And this is the moment Alar's high priest points frantically toward the lake, that vast, still body of water that never flows and never dries.
And the high priest saw something that seemed impossible. Shadows descending from the moon itself into the still water.
The lunar origin myth manifesting visually.
Exactly. And the water of the lake, which had been stagnant for millennia, suddenly began to shiver.
And then the mist arrived. Alar is so specific about this. This was not normal river mist or atmospheric condensation.
No, he called it a damnable green fog, thick and oily. And crucially, it lacked the chaotic nature of wind-driven weather. It didn't drift.
It crawled.
It crawled with a discernible, terrifying intent, rising directly from the lake to meet the moon. The entire color palette of the atmosphere shifted to that same green associated with the ancient Abide beings.
We can really trace the slow, deliberate progress of the retribution up the very structures Sarnath had built to assert its superiority. The green fog shrouded the shore. It enveloped the green stone seawall.
Crept up the 300-cubit marble walls.
Yeah, silently swallowed the shining domes of the palace, and finally choked the 1,000-cubit high temple tower until its arrogant peak was entirely lost in that sinister haze.
And as this suffocating green fog engulfed the city, unnatural phenomena became visible. Alar describes seeing strange, cold, green lights moving beneath the water.
Not reflections.
Not reflections. These were things moving deliberately in the black depths of the lake, rising to meet their environment. The retribution was organizing itself, both above and below the surface.
And then comes the environmental check that confirms the fundamental geography itself is being altered. The gray rock Akurian,
A massive known navigational landmark.
which usually rears high above the water near the shore, Alar saw it was almost submerged.
Which prompts that terrifying insight that Alar records in his deposition. He debated whether the water was rising or if the rock, the very foundation of the land Sarnath was built upon, was sinking.
Either way,
Either way, the stability of the ground, which Sarnath had arrogantly built upon for 1,000 years, was being violently undone.
Alar's response was crucial. It wasn't simple panic. He describes it as a sense of a deep, primal wrongness,
Coldness.
a cold, vague, yet swift fear that settled on his entire encampment. It prompted him to non-verbally order his retinue to just pack up and leave immediately, fleeing a danger they couldn't name, only feel.
And they fled quickly. They could hear a Sarnathian guard laughing at them from the safety of the 450-foot walls, calling them cowards for fleeing a bit of fog. But they were only about a half-league away when Alar reports hearing a sound, close to midnight, the exact transition point to the new day, the end of the 1000th year. Not a roar, but a bursting.
And they looked back to see all the mighty bronze gates of Sarnath, the ones designed for maximum security and defense, burst open as one, shaking the plain where their allied delegations were camped.
This is the precise moment Captain Tam's account takes over the narrative.
Right.
Tams confirms the massive crash that shook the plain and the simultaneous impossible bursting of all the gates. Initially, he thought it was an army sallying forth, maybe a drunken internal riot, but what he saw next was horrifyingly clear. A human tide, he said. It just poured out. Tens of thousands, no, he corrects himself, millions, blackening the plain, running from the safety of the massive walls.
And they weren't fleeing a fire, or a conventional army, or an earthquake. Tams describes the shrieking of the Sarnathians as madness born of a horror that broke them.
Yes.
Their faces, even in that sick green light, were contorted by a terror that Tams repeats was unendurable.
That detail is pivotal. They were not fleeing from fear of death. They were fleeing a realization, a psychological breakdown caused by confronting something that should not exist.
Exactly.
Tam's debriefing recounts the frantic, fragmented screams carried on the night wind. The fleeing Sarnathians had looked through the windows of the king's opulent banquet hall, and King Nargis-Hay and his nobles were simply gone.
Not just gone or dead, Tams confirms, through the terror-fueled reports, they were replaced. And here is the core, symmetrical vengeance of the doom.
The replacement is the crux of the ritualistic retribution. The Sarnathians were shrieking that in the hall where the king and his court should have been feasting on rare foods, there was a horde of indescribable green things, voiceless.
With bulging eyes and flabby lips.
A perfect, chilling, 1,000-year accurate match to the legends of the inhabitants of Ib, the very beings they had been mocking as jellyfish and moonspawn just hours before.
They hadn't just returned. They had occupied the seat of human power. And the specific sacrilege they committed in the King's Hall is detailed by Tams.
The things were horribly dancing, enacting the ancient rituals, and they were holding the golden platters, the ones set with rubies and diamonds, meant for the great, specially raised fishes served to the king and his nobles.
But the platters were empty of human food.
On the platters, Tams reports were uncouth flames, green flames, not food, not bounty, but the strange ritualistic fire linked to the ancient worship of Bokrug and the gibbous moon, now held aloft by the resurrected Ib beings in the hall of the man who had ordered their obliteration 1,000 years prior.
The revenge wasn't merely murder, it was a perfect ritualistic reversal of the Feast of the Destroying of Ib.
Completely. As Tams fled, running miles away, he looked back from a ridge. And the visual confirmation of the city's fate was absolute. The green mist was pulsing like a living thing, covering the whole city and extending far beyond the walls.
And what about that geological marker, the gray rock, Akurian?
Tams states unequivocally. It was now quite submerged. The last visual confirmation we have is that the entire city, the 450-foot walls, the 1,500-foot temple, the onyx streets, the very foundations, was completely swallowed by the ancient stagnant lake, exactly as the bodies and monoliths of Ib had been a millennium earlier.
7 years of absolute, terrified silence followed. No one from Meninar dared approach the accursed site. This brings us to part 4, 7 years after, and the final scientific resolution documented in the official surveyor's report.
Right, commissioned by the High Council of Olarnik, one of the spared allied cities.
The ones who fled.
Who fled. And the mandate of the High Council was driven by cold political pragmatism. They needed to ascertain the state of the land, check on the precious metal mines that had initially fueled Sarnath's wealth.
Right, the whole reason they were there.
And determine if any lingering supernatural threat persisted. They had to know if the doom was contagious.
And the reason they needed an external report is so telling. Due to the lingering terror among the dark shepherd folk of Nair, the locals wouldn't go anywhere near the lake.
Understandably so. So Elarnik hired distant, culturally isolated mercenaries from Felona men of yellow hair and blue eyes, led by a mercenary named Hrolf.
They were chosen specifically because they lacked the theological context to be truly scared off by the memory of Bokrug and the green things.
Exactly. They were paid a substantial sum and dispatched to render an impartial report.
And Hrolf's findings are just astonishing in their clinical totality. They provide the final, horrifying insight into the nature of the doom. The executive summary is blunt, and it serves as the final official word on Sarnath.
The city of Sarnath does not exist.
Just that. And the report emphasizes this zero trace point with incredible bureaucratic detail. It's not that Sarnath was destroyed by fire or siege, which would leave ruins and rubble for archaeologists to find.
No. Hrolf reported no ruins, no rubble, no broken pillars, no onyx-paved streets. It was not a site of destruction. Sarnath was gone, as if it had never been.
That metaphysical vanishing act is the most terrifying element. I mean, conventional destruction, like the fall of Troy or the incineration of Pompeii, it leaves a layer. It leaves ruin.
It leaves a stratigraphic layer.
Oh.
Sarnath left nothing. The sheer scale of the engineering feat required to remove all evidence of 450-foot marble walls and a 1,500-foot temple, leaving only a marsh. It suggests a force capable of undrawing the city from existence.
And the mines, the very source of Sarnath's foundational wealth and initial hubris, the gold that tempted the shepherd folk to destroy Abib in the first place.
Also gone, reported as flooded or otherwise obliterated. Where the magnificent, arrogant city once stood is now only a desolate, marshy shore, completely overgrown with reeds, returned precisely to its primordial pre-Sarnathian state.
And the only occupants found.
The site is now inhabited by detestable green water lizards in unusual number and boldness. The natural order had been violently restored, or rather, the ancient order had returned, with the water lizards potentially serving as the terrestrial biological manifestation of Bokrug's enduring presence.
Now we have to return to the gray rock Akurian. This marker confirms the finality of the land's reversal. Remember, Alar saw it almost submerged, and Tam saw it quite submerged as the doom settled.
Rolf reports a crucial geological reversal. The gray rock Akurian now rears high above the water near the shore, just as it did before the night of the feast.
So the land itself was reset.
It implies the lake level or the foundational stability of the land has returned to its exact pre-doom state, proving that Sarnath and the space it occupied was physically excised and replaced by the original marshy landscape. The geography itself was reset to year zero.
And then comes the final profound irony, the recovery of the ancient idol. The Felonian mercenaries, digging cautiously where the great temple's 1,000-cubit tower stood, found one significant object, half buried in the rushes.
It was the ancient sea-green stone idol of Bokrug, the water lizard.
The same one.
The theological confirmation was instant and terrifying to the surviving human cities. This was positively identified as the same idol taken from Ib 1,000 years prior, the one that vanished from Taranish's temple on the night of the first omen.
And the surveyor's office, devoid of any theological flair, simply stated,
It has been returned.
the irony is just breathtaking. The conqueror's city, Sarnath, is utterly erased, and the surviving human city, Ilarnek, the one that commissioned the survey, immediately claims the idol, bringing it to their own high temple, but not as a trophy.
No. The new faith, driven by raw survival and fear, is established with remarkable speed. The surveyor's report concludes that, as of the last gibbous moon again, note the ritualistic timing.
The gibbous moon.
The priesthood of Ilarnek has begun formal, desperate worship of Bokrug, the great water lizard, and the High Council urgently recommends that all Mnar citizens do the same. They are worshiping the deity their ancestors held in detestation, hoping to avert a fate that defied human imagination.
So what does this all mean? We have followed a precise 1,000-year arc that serves as a chilling case study. Conquest, institutionalized hubris, and exact metaphysical retribution.
Right.
The civilization that built 450-foot walls to escape fear was replaced by the very antiquity it despised, and the cycle of worship, violence, and consequence has turned, but with the humans now occupying the supplicant position.
And the documents, when you put them all together, provide an extraordinary lesson in memory and consequence. The precision of the retribution is perhaps the most salient takeaway for me. It wasn't random destruction.
No, it was tailor-made.
It was. The green mist matching the lunar origin myth, the being's appearance perfectly matching the 1,000-year-old legends, the green flames replacing the golden platters, and the total physical undoing of the city itself, leaving zero rubble to remind future generations of its existence.
Sarnath wasn't defeated by another empire. It was erased by a deep, patient entity that simply decided its time was up. The land was returned to its original marshy state, and the one artifact that mattered, the idol of Bokrug, was put back exactly where it belonged.
And now receiving terrified worship from the very culture that had sought to exterminate its devotees.
Right.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider as you process this devastating, meticulous history. Ilarnek's devotion to Bokrug is currently driven entirely by fear, not true faith. They've been spared the doom, but they have taken on the religious burden of the people they helped destroy. In a world of fleeting human civilizations and short memories, how long before Mana's citizens, now secure in their new Bokrug-protected prosperity, forget the graphic, unendurable terror of Sarnath's annihilation? And how long until the great, still lake, which never flows and never dries, decides that the human memory is sufficiently short and prepares to claim its next worshiper?